Carmen here, Managing Digital Editor at Ms., and I am with Victoria Dickman-Burnett, who is a youth educator and also is at the University of Cincinnati as a grad research assistant and a PhD candidate. Did I get it right? You did? Yes, and so thank you so much for taking the time. I'm very excited to talk to you. And so you are at NSAC this year doing a systemic action research workshop.
Yes.
And so walk me through, what is systemic action research?
So before I get to systemic action research, I should probably explain action research.
Yes, please.
So action research is research that aims to break down the barriers between like researcher and subject. And so it really looks it looks different than traditional research, and it's very common among like marginalized groups, difficult to reach populations. So you might have the example I used in my workshop is like a non-participatory way of researching or non-action research way of researching survivors and things that help and hinder their recovery would be if I were to go and interview survivors and then analyze that data and say, these are the things that I found. Whereas a participatory would be if survivors were to do a photo voice project where they like took photos documenting like, these are the things that help my recovery, these are the things that hinder my recovery. And so that is action research, where you have kind of the traditional relationship between like researcher and participant is very different, and ideally like you're working with people and they're almost like co-researchers in your inquiry. Systemic action research is action research that aims at like system-wide change. And so what's interesting about systemic action research is counterintuitively when I say that, people typically think like, oh, it's like really big concerted effort, whereas it's more things that kind of grow organically. I think when we look at the example that I'm going to show you from the slides, we will you'll kind of see what I'm talking about then.
Ooh, I'm so excited. Victoria brought a Black art supplies bag with her, and I'm very excited to find out what is inside of it. And so I also so action research really is sort of, I mean, it seems like a model that we should be using when we do research on social issues, right? Like allowing people to be the experts of their own experience.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. And I actually came to action research because doing work with sexual violence prevention and behavior, like all of the experience that I had in more traditional research fields, it was frustrating to routinely be told that people who have less experience with the subject aren't experts because they're objective, whereas, you know, action research values that experience. So that's the reason why I found this purely by chance almost, and I decided to pursue a PhD in it, and here I am.
Okay. I'm like, I want to know what's in the bag. I want to see, like, talk to me about what your workshop was like today.
So my workshop today, I basically worked through, I taught it as a primer to action research, kind of aiming towards the systematic change. So we started with what is action research. Then we moved into smaller projects. We actually did some photo voice. I sent the participants out. I told them, go take a photo that represents a question or a difficulty that you're facing in your organization, or a question you have. Sort of think a photo that could represent the starting point of inquiry. And I give them my email address and said, email me these. I'll put up a couple, and we'll talk about them. So they not only did they learn about it, but I was modeling it methodologically to teach them how to how to do that. So we started with like smaller project, like how to do a smaller project, because that's kind of going to be your entry point. Talked about larger projects where I did. I talked about like my dissertation project was a larger project, and kind of talked about systematic or systemic models, which is what has evolved from my dissertation project, where I drew a tree to illustrate like, this was the initial line of inquiry, but we've branched off, and so now it's these loosely connected projects that all center around the idea of how do we eradicate rape culture, particularly looking at high school settings.
Mm. Okay. And what came of it?
Okay, let's see. My tree is kind of folded up because it's here. Could you hold this while I?
Yes.
Fold. So there's two of them. One was one I did, and then the interpreter drew one in Spanish as well. Here we have a tree. So of course I was like drawing this on the fly.
The ending rape culture tree. Yes.
So we're like talking about like the classroom program was my dissertation, and we talked about how it branched off into youth inquiry, where the students had their own research projects. They could pursue those. But we also from this one, like we learned like we needed to train teachers about sexual violence, and we're developing a peer educator program, and that also branches off that the educators are training them to basically become like youth experts. And so their own inquiry might be part of it, so it branches out. And so I have a bunch of different trees that my participants in the workshop did. I'm not going to share those because I didn't get like full, like they left them for me, but I didn't get like full permission. But yes, that was like the end project, was thinking about like from like small projects to systemic inquiry.
Yeah, and so I mean, this seems like a really empowering model of researching and teaching, right? Like to say to someone, you're the expert at your own experience, and you're allowed to have questions and investigate them on your own and figure out the answer. It's kind of rare, and it's really important. What impact have you seen it had as someone who's interested in fighting rape culture? Like, what happens when you sort of open that door for young people, for survivors?
So we worked, for some context, we worked within, the initial project was within an English class. So the students, it was a wide group of students. Like some of the students may have been survivors. Some of them, hopefully, most of them will never experience this. But what I saw was after we did the program, in the first year, because we're going into the third year of the program. So after the first year, we kept in touch with the students and like gave them opportunities to continue to be involved. And so there was one young woman who was really like enjoyed the project so much that she in the next year basically became my protege, my co-researcher, and that teacher training project on there, we actually worked together to do like all of the research, design, data collection, everything that we did for that. She was involved as a senior in high school, and so she was learning some like different like research methods and stuff like that. And she's actually on the team that is helping develop your educator program. So that's like a high level of involvement, but among the other students as well in that teacher training project, we learned that students really perceived the climate of the classroom to improve after that they could have difficult conversations, that they trusted their classmates, things like that. So that was another good outcome. We've had 2 showcases, like each year of the program, we've had like a community showcase where we share with where we share with the community what the students did, and they make artwork, they do photography, things like that.
And what do you think this looks like on a movement scale? Like, where do you think sort of action research and projects like the projects that have grown out of all of this, where do you think, like, what impact do you think it would have on the movement at large if we were using more of these models?
I think that if we were using more of these models, I think it would really help to sustain, because there's a focus in it on capacity building. There's a focus on intentionality, and I think those are things that like sometimes, because sometimes movements get they have momentum, which is great. You need momentum. You can't go anywhere without momentum. But if you're not focusing on capacity building, how do we sustain this momentum? How do we, when we're not just like fired up about this and we're actually exhausted, how do we keep going forward and how do we devote resources to this? Those are the things that are going to see something through and beyond just, okay, we're in this moment, let's do this.
Yeah, well, and I mean, that ties in really nicely with the theme of the conference being beyond the breakthrough. I mean, one of the major questions that I've had about Me Too is, and also largely sort of the post 2016 resistance is, okay, but how are we going to make sure that this doesn't go away tomorrow because we wake up and we're all really burnt out, or we wake up and we all feel a little hopeless because we realize that, you know, oh my God, 2 years have gone by. And so in terms of capacity building and in terms of going beyond the breakthrough, like what sort of best practices would you recommend to folks for staying in the fight?
So I think that there are I have like two big ones come to mind. The first is leveraging existing structures. So how can you work within the framework that you've already been built? How can you use resources that already exist? Because that way it becomes less of an uphill battle. The second is, I think, on an individual level, kind of creating boundaries for yourself. And I know, like, the term self-care has gotten a bad reputation, and sometimes it's deserved, but like really being able to set the boundary of, like, for instance, I do not consume outside of my research, outside of when I'm like looking for stuff to bring into the classroom, I do not consume media that involves like sexual violence for fun. Like, I'm not going to watch Law and Order SVU or anything like that because it's like I need to.
Yeah, I am the last person in the world who says yes to watching like a feminist, non-uplifting, like sad documentary on a Friday night. I'm like, no, it's okay. I just got back from work.
Yeah, exactly. And like, so that's like being able to really set firm boundaries so that that has helped me like avoid burnout. And we try to model that with the students. The program is longer, and so this year in the new year we're actually rather than doing it in like a compressed time frame where it's like just like every day, we're actually spacing it out over the school year. So once every 2 weeks to once a week, we're discussing it rather than like, okay, we're going to talk about this for 5 weeks. But when we were talking about it for an extended time, we did build in days where it's just like, we're going to talk about how to take care of yourself, and we're going to, like, you can draw, you can paint, you can, I'm going to guide you all through a breathing exercise. Like, we're just not going to think about heavy stuff today.
Yeah.
And I think that is crucial. And I've talked to a number of people who are interested in kind of getting into this field of research, and I always say that like, you need to be able to set those boundaries. You need to have something, like, for me, it's videos of dogs and puppies, where it's just like, if I'm feeling really sad, that's like the thing I can go to. That's the immediate turnaround. And you also need to kind of evaluate with yourself, like, for me, it's like, if I had, it's like, okay, I know that there are going to be days of the year that are just rough. What is my threshold? And if I don't set that threshold, then it's very easy to move that threshold. And so it's like, if I for the rest of my life, if I have 10 days a year that are just incredibly rough, I'm completely okay with that. If I have 50 days a year, then I might need to reevaluate, which is not necessarily I need to stop this work, but something is not working and I need to figure out how to strike the balance again.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm sitting here like, yes, but I feel like these are all very sort of, I mean, social justice people have always talked about sustainable activism and burnout and stuff, but I think the idea of actually the conscious collective need to set boundaries and stuff is kind of new. It's kind of entering into that space. What stuff have you learned using this new model of research, right? Like this, well, maybe not new, but different. What have you learned about the fight to end violence and about the nature of violence, that have you learned something that's sort of contrary to the literature that was born out of these other kinds of studies where people were like,
I wouldn't say contrary, but I've learned things that seem like so simple and so essential yet are overlooked. Like, for instance, if you want to create a climate in your school where students feel safe coming and talking to guidance counselors, they have to be able to access the guidance counselor. So maybe you need to, like, maybe if, for instance, there's some mechanism of gatekeeping wherein they get yelled at and told to go back to study hall, that is a barrier that even if they trust the guidance counselor, if they can't access, and so that's one, so it's really, I think a lot of the revelations that I've had that I don't see in previous scholarship are things that are more taking into account the reality of high school and the reality that which I think everyone remembers high school, but I realize, like, being in the school day in and day out, like, the parts we remember are the things that really stick out, and not like the fact that, like, okay, well, if I have to go to the bathroom, I have to ask someone. Like, I'm monitored all the time. That's something, like, that is something that we forget relatively quickly, and so things like that. So I think that's really what I've found is just kind of more awareness of, like, the structure of what's happening.
Yeah, and what doing this sort of youth work in that setting, I've been asking a few folks to sort of, we're in these spaces, we're fighting for change in these spaces. What about these spaces might need to change? Like, is there something about the places in which kids are learning about sex and sexuality that also need to be shifted? Like, is there part of the culture of the classroom that you think can change to sort of create more opportunities for this kind of learning?
Yeah. So this is, it actually kind of goes hand in hand with a lot of what we're talking about, because one of the pieces of the work that I do in my dissertation is, I did do some more traditional research where I did a survey and analyze the data to kind of determine, get a sense of, like, what the school climate was, and also, like, we're talking about things like classroom climate. And I think that there's what I've seen from the students, particularly in the more unstructured conversations that we have, is that students seem to trust. One of the groups of students I worked with did a project where one of the things they did was name. They asked the people that they were interviewing or surveying to name, like, the teacher, like, name a safe teacher, and they didn't know what to do with that data. So I was like, well, you could put it in a word cloud and that would display. And one of the older students, because I work with them in 11th grade, and then some of the seniors, the ones that really connected with the program, like, continue to work with me. And so a couple of the young women who were seniors were, like, looking at these projects, and they're like, these are all, like, English and history teachers. Like, it's all the like, the subjects that you have conversations. So I think that like the big takeaway is just, like, doing intentional work of, like, cultivating a safe climate in your classroom. And if you're the type of person who is open to have, the type of teacher that you structure your class in a way that it's open to discussion rather than top-down instruction, that's, those are going to be the classrooms that people will feel more safe having the discussions.
Yeah, totally. And where do you think, like, this sort of action research, what role do you think it could play in helping advance this movement beyond the breakthrough?
I think it could. I think it could play. That it could play a huge role. If I had my way, and, like, some like, you know, and there was some wealthy benefactor who just wanted to give me a substantial grant. Like I would create a school, like an action research institute specifically for activists. Specifically for activists and other like sexual violence related practitioners that would just be focused on training on action and action research, because I feel like there's like action research within our community, within the community that I work in. There's a lot of people that have a similar story of like, I was doing activist work and I was doing research and I wanted to blend them, but I was told I couldn't, and I was told that my work as an activist actually hurt my credibility. And this, you know, there's this guy over here, it's almost guy, who like has no experience in this, and he, you know, he's objective, and so that's the community is people who have finally found a space to blend these things. And we talk about like, you know, traditional researchers. Obviously, a lot of them are not reaching. I mean, they try to, and I think they, you know, not to throw traditional research under the bus, because I also do traditional research, but you know, they may try to reach practitioners, but there's a gap. And at the same time, like in activist circles, the activist circles I've been in, I've seen where it's very, you know, I understand why there's a distrust of research, but it could also lead to like not really thinking things through. And so I think that if there were a way to, you know, action research is a bridge, but it's a bridge that hasn't gotten that much press outside of certain circles where it's known, and I would really want to, and that's part of the reason why I'm here, and I'm very excited to be here, is just to bring action research to an audience that maybe doesn't know about it. I mean, there's definitely some people in my workshop who did, but a lot more who didn't. So,
well, first of all, I hope there's a wealthy benefactor listening who is going to fund your Action Research Institute. Yes. I also love everything you're saying. I mean, so much of what we do at Ms. too is about public scholarship, right? We have this really contemporary focus on making sure that these women's studies concepts that have defined the feminist movement for so long can really be read, consumed, understood, and spread by people who don't come from the ivory tower and people who need to be served by those ideas the most, right? So I just love it because it makes sense, and I relate so much too, because, you know, I do journalism, and there's this notion that if you're a journalist who also has opinions in their everyday, day-to-day life, God forbid that you have opinions on the page, that you're less of a journalist, you're not a real, like your facts clearly must be lies because you feel a certain way about the fact that women are people. And so, yes, I mean, I love it. And I'm like, someone please, more action research. That's,
yes.
And I already know from the work that I've done and just hearing about the work that you do that, you know, that's obviously going to take us beyond the breakthrough is what's going to happen if we actually let survivors control the narrative and shape the conclusions that are come to about their lives and their experiences. Like only amazing and powerful things could come from that. So thank you for being here and showing us all a little bit about how to do action research. And yeah.
And I'll just put in a plug if you want to learn more about action research. This is going live through Facebook, right?
Yes.
The Action Research Center Facebook page is a great place to start. I think there is a way from that page that you can get on the listserv. Anyone can be on the listserv, and also look up just the Action Research Center at the University of Cincinnati.
Yeah, we are going to link to the Action Research Center. I'll tag them in the video. So yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Please do stay connected.
I will.
Yay. Also, you see these snowflakes, right?
Yeah.
Okay.